Alright, here we have a hand between LLinusLLove on the button here and the challenger Zaz91 in middle position, played at 5100 at PokerStars. So, to start off, Zaz91 opens for 2.5x, we get a flat in the CO, and LLinusLLove opts for this small 9.5 big blind squeeze in position here. Zaz91 responds with an almost 3x 4-bet, being that they're nearly 200 big blinds deep. A large 4-bet is not necessarily out of the ordinary. LLinusLLove flats and they go to the flop in a 4-bet pot. Zaz91, after the flop comes Jack 9 4 rainbow, continuation bets for a third of the pot. LLinusLLove flats it. Turn comes the Jack of clubs, pairing the top card on the board and bringing the backdoor flush draw. And here Zaz91 continues again with another third pot bet. LLinusLLove flats once again. And the river card comes the King of Diamonds. Quite an action card here, which Zaz checks the Linus, and Linus shoves in the rest of his stack for about 2/3 of the pot bet. And Zaz ends up calling, and it ends up LLinusLLove has the ace 9 for the river bluff with a pair of 9s, and the ace blocking ace king here, I suppose. And Zaz91 shows down KK for the top full house and the nuts. So this is an interesting kind of quintessential hand of turning a pair into a bluff. LLinusLLove makes the call here that in his range he doesn't really have many other hands that are better to bluff with other than the ace 9 here. The ace blocker supposedly being quite strong, being able to block ace jack and ace king on the river here. Whereas Zaz91's play is quite interesting. I think the flop is pretty standard from both players, not too much of interest happening there. But perhaps the turn play when the jack pairs brings some interest. When the jack pairs, all of a sudden the aces, kings, queens, those nutted hands kind of lose a bit of their nuttiness. So the third pot bet by Zaz on the turn is interesting, as well as his check on the river when the king comes. While he does, with the KK block, you know, all the pairs of kings that would be calling them down on the river, I'm not sure it's entirely likely that Linus has too many kings left in his hand here. Ace king potentially folds either the flop or the turn already if it's flatted pre-flop. Same with king. Well, king queen is still in there, I suppose, so it's not so bad. But interesting nonetheless. Right, so now looking at the hand in GTO plus solver we're using to analyze the play here. First we'll start with what ranges we're giving each player. So Zaz91, the out of position player who 4-bet preflop, we give this kind of range, heavily weighted towards ace king, aces, kings, queens, and the suited kings are prevalent in a typical 4-betting range, as well as a smattering of lower frequencies with suited aces, you know, king queen suited, ace king, ace queen off, as well as the smaller pocket pairs. Now 4-bet ranges are kind of depending on, you know, stack sizes and you know, your flop subset that you run it on. You can get kind of different results for what preflop ranges are optimal, but through looking at solver results that I've seen, this is something quite typical for a 4-bet range out of position in these positions. And similarly, in position for LLinusLLove, he's going to be flatting all the pocket pairs and suited connectors that he chose to squeeze preflop, which is not all of them, as he, you know, shouldn't be squeezing these low pocket pairs, low suited connectors with a high frequency to begin with. But I also have him flatting aces in position to a 4-bet, kind of a typical thing that you see in 4-bet ranges, 4-bet calling ranges, I mean, as well as some lower frequency suited aces, suited kings, full frequency ace queen suited though, that type of thing. Now looking at the sim that we have, basically for a 4-bet pot, I gave a small and large bet sizing for on each street, so either 33% or 82% sizings here. I didn't mess around with quarter pot sizings since none of our opponents chose them in this instance, but potentially they're good to include, as well as smaller size check raises, basically either near min raise sizes or shove options were given to each opponent when facing a bet. Okay, so on the flop, we have this strategy for Zaz91, basically c-betting at a fairly high frequency, approaching 75%. And if I was to just simplify this to just one sizing at a third of the pot, this frequency might be closer to 80% or something like that, I imagine. And with kings, it's a pretty easy c-bet, maybe checking it sometimes to balance the range. Basically, the checking range in this position, if you have like total garbage, like ace 8 of spades, something like that, ace 5 of spades, ace queen off, kind of the worst hands. Zaz91 can think about check folding those and just strengthening his range. But he continuations bets the kings for a third of the pot. Linus doesn't really have much of an option to raise here, instead flatting most of the range. And of course, ace 9 of spades with the pair of nines here is a pretty easy continue and flat here. Yeah, surprisingly, Linus only folding 14% of his hands. So having to continue quite a bit here, which is kind of an interesting dynamic. I'm not sure exactly what to make of such a high continue range here. Really only folding these absolute garbage suited connectors, pocket 5s and pocket 8s like to go. Presumably keeping 7s and 6s for some weird blocker effect going on here. And yeah, similarly getting rid of like ace 5, ace 3 type of garbage. So pretty easy flat for Linus. I don't think the flop play is really that interesting at all. I think it's pretty standard, though Linus loves having the flat almost his entire range is an interesting result. Now on the turn, it gets a bit more interesting. On the jack, pairing the board. Zaz should be continuing here quite a bit at the time still. Still continuing betting about 70% of the time. But opting to check hands like ace king, ace queen, some straight draws, but continuing to bet aces, kings, and queens, those overpairs at a fairly high frequency. Most of the jacks that he trips up with. And for even some of the ace 9, king 9 type of junk, or type of jazz, I mean, it's not total junk. So mostly just betting pairs here, even ace 4, 10s, jacks at high frequency, and unpaired hands going into the bluffing range. King queen and ace queen seem to be fairly slam dunkish bets, as well as flush draws. Any backdoor flush draws that he picks up kind of are going into the bluffing range. So bets a third. And again, Linus doesn't really have much of an option to shove over top here, just because the 4-better's range is so strong, holding, you know, some jack X and those overpairs that are just going to be snapping him off. But again, Linus can't really fold very much, having to call 85% of the time still, which is quite insane. Even to a third pot bet, that's still well above minimum defense. So interesting things happening at this kind of low stack to pot ratio. And Linus just getting rid of more trash here, really. kind of these nothing hands, but yeah, continuing all of his ace king off still. And king queen, which has the 2 overcards and the gutter ball. Even calling 8-7, which has the low end gutter ball some of the time, which is quite surprising. So again, the turn play isn't really that surprising. Here, this is a fairly standard turn continuation bet range in a 4-bet pot, I think. But on the river, king of diamonds comes, and at this point, Zaz91 correctly identifies a check with the king-king, just kind of blocking the entire world. And along with that, he'll be checking kind of 10s, queens, and king X here. Kind of these middling hands, and then this nutted king-king to kind of check raise with, or to check call with, I mean. Check calling probably also with all these king X's as well. And Zaz should be shoving in with ace king. Ace queen is kind of the main bluff, as well as ace 10 that he ends up with. Ace 9 even getting bluffed here. Ace 8, kind of anything that doesn't have a made hand gets bluffed by Zaz here. But kings, he checks, and now LLinusLLove ends up on the river with an interesting range. He doesn't really have that many hands that are just complete air. He has kind of these low pocket pairs, maybe at some frequency, like 5s, 6s, 7, 8s, which mainly opt for checks compared to ace 9, which is a stronger hand in absolute value, but is a better bluffer in here. Presumably the ace blocker is just so good. So ace 10 here though, checking, which is interesting. Same with ace queen here, checking for LLinusLLove. But value shoving any jack, obviously. Ace king and better, checking back king queen, king 10, queen queen 10 10. But bluffing pairs of 9s, as well as ace 5, ace 4, ace 3 type of hands. But favoring checkbacks with kind of these low connected hands. So why would Linus want to bluff ace 9 but not ace 10 is the question. The EV is 0 for checking back ace 10 even. I guess the only ace 10 he has is with the clubs. So yeah, it's quite narrow ranges, so funky blocker things are liable to happen. So king 10 of clubs is like one of Zaz's folds, as well as 10-10, I guess, these pocket pairs. So Linus really doesn't want to be holding a 10 or a queen here, I guess, when he bluffs, because that's like the entirety of Zaz's folding range, mostly just like queen queen when he checks. So holding the 10 is just really bad. Ace 9 is good because the ace blocker is good, because ace king is calling. Ace 9 is even calling. So makes sense from him. It's kind of always hard to find these pair bluffs where, yeah, the ace 9 is a good hand, but its blocking effects are so much better than 7-7 here. So even though 7-7 has, an EV of effectively 0, it's still not getting bluffed here. Just because we can find a better, higher EV bluff with ace 9 instead. Alright, so that's been a hand.